Everyone loves a good story, especially one with heroes, drama, and a giant wooden horse. The Trojan War is the blockbuster franchise of the ancient world, all thanks to a poet we call Homer. There's just one tiny, inconvenient problem. Homer wasn't a historian. He was a storyteller, composing the Iliad about 400 years after the events supposedly happened. That's like me writing a detailed eyewitness account of medieval England based on campfire stories my distant ancestors might have heard. He also conveniently only covers a few weeks in the 10th year of the war, a fantastic way to avoid explaining the logistics of a decade-long beach party. This wasn't history being recorded, it was the ancient equivalent of a prestige television series, crafted from generations of oral tradition where details get embellished. Oral tradition is a wonderful thing if you want a good song, but it's a terrible way to keep facts straight. By the time it was written down in the 8th century BCE, the story was less about a real conflict and more about exploring what it means to be a hero, what honor is, and why you shouldn't annoy the gods. For centuries, people assumed Troy was just a myth. Then came Heinrich Schliemann in the 1870s, a wealthy German businessman with a Homer obsession and a truly heroic disregard for proper archaeological methods. Armed with the Iliad as a treasure map, he went to a hill in modern-day Turkey called Hisarlik and started digging. By digging, I mean he dynamited his way through layers of history, destroying almost everything to get to the bottom as fast as possible. He wasn't looking for history, he was looking for treasure to prove Homer right. When he found a cache of gold and jewels, he immediately declared it Priam's treasure, smuggled it out of the country, and had his wife wear it for a now infamous photograph. Modern archaeology is pretty certain the treasure came from a layer 1,000 years older than the supposed Trojan War. So he didn't just find the wrong treasure, he found it in the wrong city from the wrong millennium. A spectacular failure, all things considered. Putting aside Schliemann's chaotic contribution, what did we actually find at Hisarlik? A whole bunch of cities, stacked on top of each other like historical pancakes. Archaeologists have identified at least 9 main layers. The one that best fits the timeline, Troy 7a, does show evidence of being destroyed by a fire around 1180 BCE. Sounds promising, right? The problem is its size. The mighty city of Troy, with its high walls and broad streets, was a citadel that was maybe, on a good day, 5 acres. That's about 4 football fields. Grand enough for a regional chieftain, sure, but hardly the sprawling metropolis Homer described. An army of 100,000 Greeks laying siege to this place for 10 years is like using an aircraft carrier to capture a fishing boat. The scale is just completely, utterly wrong. You could have walked around the entire city in about 15 minutes. While Greek poets were spinning tales, another civilization was actually writing things down. The Hittites, based in central Anatolia, kept meticulous records on clay tablets. And in their archives, we find mentions of a pesky kingdom on their western flank called Wilusa. Phonetically, Wilusa is uncannily similar to Ilios, the other Greek name for Troy. The tablets mention a king of Wilusa named Alexandru, which sounds suspiciously like Alexandros, the alternate name for Paris, the guy who supposedly started the whole mess. The Hittites also complain about a group of aggressive sea raiders from the west they call the Ahiyawa. Say that out loud. Ahiyawa. Achaeans, the Greek mainlanders. These records don't describe an epic 10-year war over a beautiful queen. They describe boring, realistic stuff, treaty violations, disputes over territory, and struggles for regional influence. So, the historical core of the Trojan War might be a series of glorified trade squabbles and diplomatic incidents that got a much better PR campaign centuries later. Let's just pretend for a moment that the Greeks did send a massive army. Homer talks about a fleet of over 1,186 ships carrying more than 100,000 soldiers. First, that's more ships than the Spanish Armada. Second, where do you park them all? The beach at Troy isn't that big. Third, and most importantly, how do you feed an army that size for 10 years in enemy territory? Foraging would strip the entire region bare in a few months. Armies of that era couldn't maintain long sieges because supply lines were a nightmare. They had to live off the land, which meant they were constantly moving. The idea of 100,000 men sitting on a beach for a decade, occasionally fighting, is a logistical fantasy. Think about the sanitation. Think about the boredom. It wouldn't have been an epic of heroes. It would have been a festering pit of disease and mutiny within the first year. Perhaps the biggest clue that the Iliad is not a historical document is the constant, meddling presence of the gods. This isn't subtle divine inspiration. The gods are active characters with team jerseys. Hera and Athena are staunchly Team Greece, while Apollo and Aphrodite back the Trojans. Zeus is the exasperated referee trying to keep things from getting too out of hand. They deflect spears mid-flight, spirit heroes away in clouds of mist, and deceive each other to influence the battle. It makes for great drama, but it's the very definition of mythology. No serious historical account includes gods physically showing up on the battlefield to trip an enemy soldier. It's a way of explaining human success and failure through a divine lens, attributing the chaos of war to something more than just human decisions. Basically, if your primary source involves deities arguing over who gets to win the war, you're reading a myth. Full stop. The supposed date of the Trojan War, around 1200 BCE, is significant. It sits right at the heart of one of history's most mysterious periods, the Late Bronze Age collapse. Across the entire Eastern Mediterranean and Near East, civilizations that had thrived for centuries suddenly fell apart. The Hittite Empire vanished. The Mycenaean palace-states in Greece collapsed. Great cities in Syria and Canaan were burned to the ground. We don't know the exact cause. It was likely a perfect storm of climate change, famine, mass migrations of sea peoples, and systemic failure. In this context of universal chaos, dozens of cities were destroyed. The story of a great city being sacked by invaders wasn't a unique event. It was the story of the entire era. The Trojan War legend is likely a cultural memory of this traumatic period, a composite story that bundles all that fear, loss, and violence into one single epic narrative to make sense of a world that had suddenly, terrifyingly fallen apart. So, did the Trojan War happen? The one Homer describes with 1,000 ships, a 10-year siege, and meddling gods, all for one woman? Almost certainly not. But did something happen? Probably. There was likely a real city called Wilusa, or Troy. It was likely a significant fortified trading post. It almost certainly had conflicts with its neighbors, including the Mycenaean Greeks or Ahiyawa, over resources and control of the Dardanelles Strait. And like many other cities at the time, it was probably destroyed in the chaos of the Bronze Age collapse. The epic story Homer gave us is a masterpiece of literature, but it's not a documentary. It's a legendary echo of a much more mundane reality, a series of small-scale conflicts and the memory of a world-shattering collapse, all polished over 400 years into the greatest war story never fought. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!